Those Roxy Greeks were three men from Kythera. The shores of their island rise steeply to a central plateau of cultivated valleys and plains. Its limestone hills are softened by broom and sage. Among Greek islands, Kythera is of middling size. From its heights you can see the Taygetus Range on the mainland and the White Mountains of Crete. Ships sail past Kythera, but few called there. It was little known to the world. It is a paradox that it could also enjoy renown as the Isle of Aphrodite, honoured in poetry and imagination. The Venetians were masters of the island for 500 years. They called it Cerigo. They built the fortress standing high above the Bay of Kapsali. Later, the British governed Kythera for half a century. They also left their mark. For centuries, the Christian Orthodox faith has been proclaimed in Kythera. People lived their lives to the rhythm of the church calendar. There are not many places in the island where a church, a monastery, or some sainted hill is not in view. Next to faith stood the family. Both were fortified by village life, where houses huddled together around a domed church and a central platea. Life was not easy. The people sowed wheat and barley. Only on a feast day would they enjoy bread from pure wheat flour. They toiled in fields and gardens and orchards. They tended olive groves and vineyards and made oil and wine. They sometimes killed a goat or a calf, but days were few when meat was on the table. Those Roxy Greeks, Anolis Aronis, Panagiotis Phyros, and Yorgos Protopsaltis, spent 7 years at school. They learnt of the heroes of independence and their duty to Greece and the great idea. Poor Kythera sent its young men abroad, to Smyrna in Turkey, to Russia's Black Sea ports, to American cities and Australian towns. Panagiotis Phyros made his choice early. In 1907, Panagiotis Phyros sailed from the Greek port of Patra. That summer he arrived at Ellis Island in New York Harbour. He showed the immigration officers he could read and write. He showed them $25 cash. He would not be denied entry as a pauper. Panagiotis said he was 19 years old, that he was going to join his brother in St. Louis, Missouri. But he was just 16, and there was no brother in St. Louis. There was ragtime music. Paddle steamers plied the Mississippi. St. Louis was a boom town. The city had hosted the World's Fair and the Olympics. Signs of affluence were everywhere. But for Panagiotis Phyros, life in St. Louis was not affluent. His home was a shared room. He worked long hours shining shoes or peddling goods. Most of his earnings went to pay the patron. The patron was the man who paid Panagiotis' fare to America. He supplied the dollar bills flashed at Ellis Island. It took 3 years to repay the debt. By 1910, Panagiotis Firos had moved to the Missouri capital, Jefferson City. He had become Peter Ferris. His brother Philip joined him there, working as a candy maker. The Young Turk regime in Constantinople was now outraging Greek opinion. Greeks in America expected a war. They were joining volunteer military units. They were ready to make their sacrifice for the great idea. In the autumn of 1912, Peter and Philip Ferris left Jefferson City. With many other young men, they boarded a ship in New York Harbour, bound for Greece. Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia and Montenegro had formed the Balkan League. They were allies in a war against Turkey. They would seize the European provinces of the Ottoman Empire. They would divide up Thrace and Macedonia. They would liberate their Greek, Bulgarian and Slav peoples. The Balkan League would slay the Ottoman dragon. Crown Prince Constantine led the Greek army. He was no amateur soldier. He was a graduate of the Berlin War Academy. Constantine's brothers also served. They are seen here during a lull in the campaign. Reading the newspaper is Prince Andrew, father of the Duke of Edinburgh. Peter Ferris had come all the way from America to enlist. He was 22 years old. Greece's navy played a decisive role in the war. Greek warships controlled the Aegean. Turkey could not bring her armies across from Syria and Asia Minor. An infant air force also played its part. Turkey had gone to war unprepared. Her forces in Macedonia and Thrace were too few. Her soldiers were poorly trained and led. Turkey was defeated in 8 months. Venizelos, the Greek Prime Minister, and Constantine were jubilant. Greece would annex much of Macedonia and Epirus. But the Bulgarians were not happy. They wanted a larger share of Macedonia. They wanted Salonika. Greek and Bulgarian troops were in the city and the mood was tense. In June 1913, Bulgaria's army attacked the Greeks and the Serbs. This second Balkan War was over in a month. Bulgaria lost. In 1915, Constantine was king. He refused to send his army to Gallipoli. He would not leave Greece open to attack by Bulgaria. Greece would remain neutral. But his Prime Minister, Venizelos, wanted Greece to join the Allies. Urged on by France and Britain, Venizelos would break with the king. The Allies failed at Gallipoli and withdrew their forces. They sent most of them to Salonika. Venizelos set up a rival Greek government in Salonika under the protection of the Allies. He assembled an army there. In 1916, King Constantine came under more pressure. Allied troops entered Athens. Rifle and machine gun fire echoed through the streets. The French battleship Mirabeau shelled the city. In 1917, the Allies gave the king an ultimatum. He left the throne and went into exile. Peter Ferris was about to serve in his third war. In the trenches, he would meet Emmanuel Aroni, his future business partner. The Greek army mobilised for war. At Salonika, the Greeks would meet British and French troops from Gallipoli. There were no Anzacs there. There were some Australians, including these nurses. They served with the British Army. The Salonika army was drawn from many nations. Men from Indochina, Senegal, Serbia, India. By January 1918, nearly a third of the army was Greek. The offensive began in the middle of September 1918. In a week, the enemy was in retreat. After 2 weeks, Bulgaria signed an armistice. The end of the First World War was near. Next year, Greeks marched in the Victory Parade in Paris. In 1919, Venizelos set out again in pursuit of the great idea. He dreamt that former Greek lands in Asia Minor would be Greek again. But many did not share the dream. They were getting their passports and leaving Greece. Peter Ferris had served in 3 wars. He would not serve in a 4th. He had a family to support. He would do it from Australia. In 1915, Britain secretly promised Smyrna to Venizelos if Greece entered the First World War. But Italy claimed Smyrna under a treaty signed in London. Greece began its mandate in Smyrna in May 1919. Italy undermined it, so did France. Britain withdrew financial support after Constantine returned to the throne. The Greeks were soon drawn into battle with the Turk nationalists. The Allies signed a treaty with Turkey to end the World War, but Greece would have to enforce the treaty on its own. Soon the Greeks won a victory, but it was not the knockout blow they wanted. In August 1921, the Greeks left their lines. 100,000 men marched on Ankara. Near Ankara, they met the Turks, dug in on barren ridges. In a 3-week battle, the Greeks won the heights. But both armies were exhausted. The Greeks withdrew to their former lines. The Turks rebuilt their army. Supplied by Russia, Italy and France, they were ready after a year. In August 1922, the Turks attacked and broke the Greek front. Greek soldiers retreated to Smyrna. Some burned towns as they went. What would happen now to cosmopolitan Smyrna? What would happen to its pleasant neighbourhoods? What would happen to its warehouses filled with the harvest of Asia Minor? Mustafa Kemal and his generals entered Smyrna on the 10th of September. Three days later, the city was on fire. It would burn for more than a week. The warships of the Allies looked on. For over 1 million people, life in Asia Minor was coming to an end. In 1922, Peter Ferris was in Manila, New South Wales, where his brother Philip had a cafe. Soon he would go into business with his cousin George Saltis. Saltis had served with the Greek army in Asia Minor. Emmanuel Aroni was the third partner. He too had a family in Greece to support. By 1925, they were Peters and Company. They had a refreshment room in Bingara, New South Wales. The town served a prosperous district. Its main street was shaded by pepper trees. Returned soldiers marched there on Anzac Day. Aroni took care of important customers. Their cafe became popular. The partners prospered. They sent money home. Peter Ferris became a citizen. His relative, Sarafis, had fought in the war in Asia Minor. Ferris sponsored him to come to Australia. The partners had time to entertain visiting Greeks. Time to hunt rabbits, to fish, to learn about panning for gold, to hang out, to be of service to the community. To mix with the big end of town. There was time too for visits to the Athenian Club in Sydney, to talk politics and business with other Greeks, and to honour the National Day. And there was time and money to open another cafe. They invested in the Golden Bell in Barraba. But the time away from his family was weighing on Peter Ferris. 10 years was too long. In 1931 he made an arrangement with his partners and left for home. Peter Ferris took money to Greece, but he left his capital in Australia. He entrusted it to George Saltis. In Kythera he used his money to build a fine house. It was good to be close to his loved ones again. Kulla gave him a second daughter in 1932. They took part in the life of the island. They went to christenings, weddings and funerals. They added another son to their family. In 1934 the spell was broken by news from Australia. Peter Ferris had to return. He would take his 13-year-old son Yannis with him. At Athens, Peter and Yannis climbed the Acropolis Hill. With them were Emmanuel Aroni's 3 sons, Peter, James and Spiros. There was time on the passage for Yannis to think about his new life in Australia. Time too for Peter Ferris to think about all the money Peters and Company were spending in Bingara. George Saltis was managing Peters and Company. He spoke English well. He got things done. Saltis drove the Roxy development. Victor Peacock was showing pictures in the Soldiers' Memorial Hall. A new cafe had opened close to the hall. The old silent picture show near Peters and Company's cafe had closed. They had lost the theatre crowds. Peter Ferris returned to find his cafe in temporary premises. His partners had already started a bold new project. It would be completed in March 1936 at great cost. A modern picture theatre flanked by a new cafe and a string of shops. A guest house so patrons could stay overnight. A handsome theatre auditorium bathed in a soft light. Removable seats so it could double as a dance hall. The newspaper reported that on opening night the crowd stormed the streets. The Roxy was overflowing. Speeches were made. George Saltis said it was the proudest moment of his life. He thanked the people of Bingara for the inspiration to carry on, in spite of all the obstacles that had beset them. But the Roxy was now in a cinema war. Victor Peacock had moved out of the Soldiers' Memorial Hall. He surprised Peters and Company by building and opening his new Regent Theatre months ahead of them. Peacock was a Gallipoli veteran with a dim view of the Greeks. He devised some of those obstacles mentioned by George Saltis. The Regent Theatre's newspaper advertisements declared it to be 100% Australian. The Roxy responded with a 100% Australian program. It featured Grandad Rudd. It was supported by an Australian first half. but Peters and Company were running out of money. The Regent stepped up the pressure with some price cutting. It was the last straw. 6 months after their dazzling first night, Peters and Company signed a deed of arrangement with their creditors under the Bankruptcy Act. Other proprietors, including the Greek Kavoussis brothers, continued showing films at the Roxy. But in 1958 the theatre closed. For 40 years it was a sleeping beauty. Then Bingara residents Nancy McInnes and John Wern and others persuaded the local council to buy and restore the theatre. It opened again in 2004. Harry Vangis and Jim Lilius continued the Greek Cafe up to the 1960s. Later, Roxy manager Sandy McNaughton and others persuaded the council to purchase and restore it. The Greek Cafe opened its doors again in 2011.